Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Augmented Society Network, Micheál. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. We're going to get started with some questions. I'd also like to welcome Julie again, my co-lead at the Augmented Society. And we're interviewing the contributors who have taken part in the Creativity Offers Us a New Formula for Life work that we've been doing over the last year. So, Micheál, it's wonderful to have you here. I wondered if you'd just kind of introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the work that you do, and then we can get into the work that you did for the Creativity Project.
Okay, thanks for inviting me to be involved as well and take part in it, because I think no matter what the objectives were, given the people involved, something valuable would kind of start to happen, and you start thinking. And I think for me, engaging with what people call art, it's a debatable term, is valuable for me in the kind of conversations it generates. I think that can be what's exciting about it, who you meet and what it makes you think, So I see the work in that way as well. But I'm also interested in the formalities of what art history and objects and things, and the difference between that and digital, and understanding and knowing that, and situating myself with that. So for about let me see, since about 2008, I would say, and I was doing work before that, which is relevant to this for sure. I started to do projects, really, which, and that word is overused. It's a bit corporate. It's a bit lazy. It sounds like it's something from engineering, but people do use the term as well, where I would investigate something, but not like, say, forensic architecture based at Goldsmith, which I really rate and are fantastic. And their kind of abilities might be very important right now, in fact, given what's happening on the planet. But I like to kind of fool around and muck with technologies. And I think the day is long gone when, that was an unusual thing to have different kinds of machinery in your presence. So maybe when art first began to be discussed in the Renaissance period, let's say, there was kind of nature and the landscape and sort of a very little physical cultural artifacts. So if you produced a painting, it would be an amazing and spectacular thing maybe for people to see. Right now, I think I'm sort of hostile to the idea of making work. I prefer to locate and find things. Nothing original in that, really. That's an old idea, but I'm fairly fundamentalist about it. I might enhance something just to give attention to its inherent kind of properties, but I like to go out into the world, especially when something new comes along, like self-checkout machines in shopping malls or supermarkets, or when I see traffic wardens, or whatever you call them in different countries, civil enforcement officers, I think they're called here, CEOs. They capture images of parked cars in order to prevent arguments and fights and prove that the car was not illegally but badly parked. So my first project was precisely to do with hacking that system. I saw these, I knew that there was a lot of photography involved in traffic policing, and it kind of amused me. I loaned a car to someone, a small car that I happened to own at the time, and they went off to London for the day, and they got a ticket for having driven in a bus lane. And I received the letter a few weeks later. This is the 1990s, actually, long before this project, with a little black and white photograph of them caught in the act. And it was very funny. And it was as if the car had sent home a postcard from its day out in London, And it was funny because there was a little animosity between me and the driver, who I won't say who it was. So it kind of added to the kind of the frisson there. So the project I did first was to do with hacking the traffic warden photography system, and all kinds of really interesting things emerged during that project. And I presented it as art in a white cube kind of gallery, and one thing led to another. And then that gained notice. And as a result, I've conducted sort of 5 or 6 similar things. And in the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years, I've been doing most of my work, if not all of it, in Ireland, and through a series of residencies. Partly I've been re-engaging where I come from, not with any particular big idea in mind, but maybe unconsciously there's some kind of desire to do that. And I've refused to kind of play the game that sometimes occurs in ostensibly beautiful locations. You look at the landscape, the green fields, the lovely Atlantic, and I decided instead to give my attentions to the mundane technologies about us, including traffic systems, wind farms, the pipes and tubing that go underneath roads, the surveillance systems that exist in every institution and every gallery. So there's a quite broad range of technology, which I see as analogous to each other. So if you think about digital flows and digital information, you also have physical flows that run as if a representation of that. You've got Deliveroo riders running around our streets, and people delivering packages for courier companies in direct reflection of the packet switching that's taking place on the internet. So that's the kind of thing that interests me, you know.
I think geospatial data is absolutely fascinating, and with the idea of adding on those some people refer to them as meta activity of the humans who are actually interacting with that system. It's not just where the water pipes are. It filters up as data's become more ubiquitous into our world. So from that perspective, I think I get a feel for where you are, although the kind of irreverence that you bring to that is also great, because it adds not necessarily a comedy, but I do understand you are a very funny guy, I've been told. But it does add that alternative view to what we otherwise use in a daily way, both in the urban and the rural environments. I absolutely love your work, Micheál. Thank you for that. Just can you?
And do you, when you say so you talk there, you mentioned the kind of human side of things, the way human beings still seem to be present amidst all this, and playing games. It seems like a natural instinct to be mischievous, actually, and to try and break things, or to try and find workarounds, and to fool the tech, even for just simply for fun. There seems to be a huge, children do it, young people do it, but I think adults do as well, and they get a great kick out of it.
I think it's fascinating when you look around you and you ask yourself, is this the best we could have done? You know, is this city centre the best we could have done, or what could we have done if we were thinking differently? And the way that you work seems to lend itself to thinking differently, which is essentially what we're trying to achieve with this project, you know, repositioning the creative, the resourceful in humankind to think differently. Could you tell us a bit about the work you've done for, and I'm going to use the word project, but I will apologize for that.
For this particular call, I've kind of thought about it carefully, and I've been doing some new things. So I've got this touring kind of show of work that I built up over 3 years. When I say built up, once again, I try to avoid making anything. It's material that I've decided to present, but some of it's very substantial. It takes a lot of time to kind of move it around and take care of it. But in the glitches, I've become slightly hungry to do new things. And I was approached by some very young, relative to me, kind of people in Brighton who just finished degrees and so on in art, fine art, and other subjects, who were simultaneously against the institution while being in it. And they pulled themselves into a collective and organized a series of shows in student houses, and then in kind of guerrilla one-night shows with huge amounts of effort, you know. And I was really tickled by the way they worked. And I went to some of them, and they invited me to be part of one. So when I was invited with them, I thought that the work would also suit this project. So basically, I enjoy looking around, using whatever happens to me in my life, because I had 2 young children and now they're older, but you know, you have to be practical. You're trying to make ends meet and do other things, and there's a huge amount of pressure. But I think even within that pressure, there is always the possibility, and I realize that I'm a middle-aged man speaking, so I'm not kind of, you know, perhaps I'm representing an ostensibly privileged demographic, but in reality, I had huge amounts of involvement with my children, and I needed to make ends meet. So I would use what happened in the supermarket and so on. Anyway, recently I've been traveling up and down on the trains and moving around, and in Britain you get first class carriages and you get ordinary class, so the class system seems to be very built in. And I was interested, the only distinction between the first class carriages and a lot of trains in Britain is that they've got a little headrest thing with first class on it. And I started collecting those. I'm part of something called ABC Artist Books Cooperative with people like Micheál and all kinds of characters, who are kind of well known for this. But I thought I'd make a book of those. So that was one thing that I did. I just collected a whole carriage load and placed them on top of each other, and I put that in these artist books events. I would bring them along and say, that's a book. It's made of textiles, cloth, first class. And then I realized that there were, from another privatized train company, I was in my studio one day with someone I share my studio with, and I realized that if you turn them upside down, these headrest covers worked like knickers or bikini bottoms or mankinis, or there's something kind of erotic or crude and in it, and I thought that's really funny. So I had that idea in mind, which actually was given to me by it wasn't given to me by my studio partner. We had a kind of bit of fun with this. I was like, this is hilarious. I'm going to use that. I said, that's something and I didn't. And then your opportunity came along, but so did this show with these phony art collective people, and they have a photographer amongst them, and they were up for it. They were all punky young kind of artists, and they were up for wearing this and posing with them on for this exhibition and using them outside their outfits, inside. Some of them are a little bit lewd. There's something dangerous and unacceptable about it, I think, in a whole range of ways. But once again, I'm sort of very interested in the idea of just underneath the radar, kind of not doing something too extreme for everyone, but nevertheless pushing a little bit back at orthodoxy. So maybe 1970s punk is one thing. This is not that. It's kind of got that element in it, but playing it safe as well. And there's something very, I think people find it difficult not to be extreme and take it to the limits. That's what pranksters do, and that's what the joke is about. So I think maybe the art word permits me to be a bit more subtle with it, really.
Yeah. So when I first encountered your pieces, there were instructions on the sizing of them. And I was reading that one of them had lengthy straps that had been, or you were either considering, and I was thinking, what on earth is this? And then I saw the pictures. The way that you've actually put them on people, is that something that you're going to maybe explore further, or do you treat that as kind of the end point for that and you'll move on? How do you get your creative work? How do you get into that phase to look at that and think that needs big straps, that needs little straps, when perhaps I might look at it and think, well, they're just, I'm not sure what they're called, antimacassars, I don't know. What makes you work that way?
Yeah, I guess that those items could be working. I mean, people started to email me when I started to show these images and share them on Instagram and so on. A friend of mine, who was once a student of mine, actually, was an Indian film director, Partho Sengupta. He compared them to langots and what people would wear in certain kind of rituals in India, and they look exactly like that too. So I added that word to the list. So it could be every what made me interested in this? The honest answer is I don't know, but that's a cop-out. I mean, there's something called people have intuition, right? And maybe people underestimate the value in intuition, and maybe I would like to encourage students to trust their intuition as well, and it's a dodgy word as well. You have to substantiate it maybe in later, but when you're doing things you don't quite know. So some of the work that I do personally, and I don't want to mystify it or sound old-fashioned, the kind of understanding of it might emerge after that, doing it. So acting first, doing later is quite a good strategy, I think, for creative practice or art. We don't want our politicians doing that, because that's precisely how, say, Donald Trump operated, you know.
Yeah.
We don't want it with people who have actual power, but I think in terms of playful approaches to the world around us, it's very effective. So I thought this would be fun. I thought maybe I gave the opportunity of people to wear this and for them to be photographed, but I didn't take part in any. I just presented the items themselves with some sort of instructions. I didn't know that it would be as popular as it would be amongst this group of people at that exhibition, but it was, and they really had fun with it. And I think it's taking the class politics thing. There's a kind of reappropriation theft, ready-made thing, which always upsets people a bit.
Well, I think we've got 2 or even 3 pieces of yours which are highlighted in the show, and those ones, I find them very amusing. But there
I have to say,
sort of
having worked with him in an office, and we shared an office for many years, it was never a dull moment, because it was always a very kind of bizarre conversation that he would often start, and then he would leave the room, and then we left pondering, and then you'd
with that conversation.
Yeah,
but likewise, you know, we would literally be rolling on the floor laughing before the term came along.
Yeah.
Until before that phrase existed, I think.
Yeah. But it was the idea, with what I loved about there was always the idea that it got you thinking, and it got you thinking about how you engage with the public. So I've been to some of your exhibitions, and people kind of walk in, and it's not your traditional what you'd expect in an exhibition, but what it does do is it actually allows you to have conversations that you might not necessarily have. And that's what I like about it. So I have my son, who you've met, he loves them. He says, when we go on the train next time, he's going to take some.
Right. I would be careful with that. I wouldn't want to encourage young people to get in trouble either. You know,
exactly. But it's a humor. That's a humorous element of what, if you take something that you think you just, if you're fortunate to be on first, rest your head. The fact is, it's a usable that you could use. I mean, you could use it, as a band-aid. You could use it as lots of other things, but you chose to use it, as a pair of pants, which I think is just wonderful.
Which happened through playing around with the material itself, very old-fashioned. Just looking at it, trying it out, having a bit of a laugh, not planning.
But it's that kind of way that you try and get people to kind of, you repurposing, and you think about it in a different way. So you have to ask yourself, what is the value of it? Because when you make it as you have, it has a whole new different type of value, doesn't it? It suddenly becomes accessible to everybody, not just those in first class. But it also says, I think, to me, a lot about the first class systems. It's just like, so I kind of laugh. So you know what? There's a message in there. But if you think about it, you know what it is. And I love it.
I love you.
Yeah, of course we are.
No, I was just, you mentioned the word intuition. I think sometimes the word courage comes into it as well. And what we're trying to do is a desperate, positive piece of action to have more people not steal headrests, to
loan them
this way. Because what kind of world would we have where, in the do no harm, I don't know, area, we could all be enjoying this kind of way of thinking, the irreverent, the slightly off the wall, the out of the ordinary. One of our contributors, Mitch, was saying, you can maybe replace the word creative with resourceful. What if we were all resourceful? Sometimes that's an easier way to think about it. You've introduced the word intuition, resourceful and intuitive. Can we start to build a sort of something we can talk about that helps people just try something out?
I mean, there are serious problems.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a real problem if people are expected to solve the world's problems with this kind of activity, and when things are instrumentalized or so if you've got too much of a kind of intention or objective in mind, maybe ironically you don't produce something which solves that problem anyway. If your political intentions are built into work, and that's become very common in the last 10, 12 years since the global financial crisis, in my view. All the artists have gone socially engaged and political. But I think simultaneously with that, you've got to look at the problems of that kind of worthy, ostensibly progressively political kind of work, because maybe it turns into its opposite. It's very dangerous too, to kind of just presume that because you want to change things for the better, that you'll succeed. I mean, good intentions have paved quite a few roads to hell in history. So, I mean, maybe this is a way personally for me as of kind of keeping out of trouble as well. So that's why I'm interested in the under the radar thing, and always having a kind of an explanation for people that is and mundane everyday things, as opposed to hacking the major corporations' databases or whatever, just wondering about how surveillance cameras works and so on.
But what I like is that when you think about art in the traditional sense, you know, you kind of, you know, you allow us to kind of just challenge that and think, you know, what is art, you know, and how do we value art and those kinds of questions. I think when you look at what you do, you ask yourself, I ask myself those questions, you know, what is art? You know, because it kind of, it breaks for me what you consider to be the traditional art making. And I like that. And it's got humor as well. And I love the humor that comes with your work as well.
But we also decided that we wouldn't use the term artist, we would use the term contributor, which is loaded in its own way. Yeah. But we have philosophers, writers, we have a mixed bag of people who are working in different ways, which I think is one of the most fun things about this.
Yeah. It can be a barrier. Words like creativity mean different things to different people. I mean, for the producers of digital technologies, the Adobe suite is what creativity is. But being able to use the Solarize filter in Photoshop doesn't make you Lee Miller or Man Ray, who invented these techniques. Reading a book on how to paint like Van Gogh and then doing those dabs and dashes doesn't make you them. It's what they were doing in the context of their time. And I don't know whether it was Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven or Marcel Duchamp, but putting the urinal in a space and calling it fountain, which is, once again, I noticed there are articles challenging the significance of this moment in history. But for me, those moments are important moments. And in a sense, I suppose what I'm doing is original, but it's also that everything you do, you find examples that are similar. I mean, isn't creativity about the social? And you brought that up at the beginning. So if everyone's being spectacular and the aesthetic is about the kind of, you know, maybe doing something the opposite of that would kind of be of interest. You know, you've got people like Kenneth Goldsmith who wrote that book on creative writing, and he's based in New York, Philadelphia, and a whole range of other practices like that. You know, where people are trying to be boring and not be creative, funnily enough. And that becomes creative because it's creative relative to what's going on. If comedians are using expletives and bad language all the time, it loses its meaning. And to be very polite would sort of tickle people then, and they'd find that strange. So it's always changing. There's no way of keeping up with this. At the risk of making it sound like fashion or style, I don't think those words are helpful, but it's a hard thing to I mean, creativity to me is like the opposite of knowledge. Being brainy, academic, scholarly is really crucial to academic institutions who also talk about the importance of creativity. But to be creativity, you have to be stupid to do something ignorant. So I worked very closely with a professional clown for many years. I orchestrated situations for him to carry out performances in, and I set things up that were kind of sadistic so that he wouldn't be able to show off and do the things he's very good at. But he really got into it because that's pure clowning at its best, where they're limited and extremely restricted. And then I like to think that I have been a succubus and taken his body of knowledge and experience, and I say this to him, and I now clown myself as a means to finding something new. And the danger there is that you are seen as an idiot. You know, that's a danger, especially given the kind of given the history and the way that certain demographics, certain groups might be deemed stupid or ignorant or foolish. So you've got to be careful with these things. But it's a great privilege if you can somehow tap into that right, I think. And you know, the whole history of slapstick and all that kind of stuff. And really, I think it's really interesting. You can use those techniques without just making gags all the time, and you can deal with very serious subjects, and that's a right as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, that was an absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you, Micheál, and very much looking forward to seeing what the guests' reactions are to your work. And it would be, hopefully you'll be able to do one of the gallery tours so you can tell people everything that you've just told us today. But thank you very, very much indeed.